So Mrs. Healy finds out one day that you're smoking pot and she confronts you on it. Did she lay the law down at that time?
She did her best. She actually walked in one morning when we were supposed to be at school, and me and some friends are cutting up a pound of marijuana, listening to Black Sabbath, smoking pot. This is like 9 o'clock in the morning, and she just said, "Get this stuff out of here." And what had started to happen was the drugs and the alcohol and the dissociation from school and so on. I started to become depressed and feel depression, and my foster brother Peter also experienced it. We stopped going out of the house. We just stayed in the house, and I described one time looking for Peter in the house and finding him, but he was in a closet hiding. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Nothing." And that's when I realized, we were really lost. And I used to try to connect with my brother Pat or my mother in Pennsylvania.
Pat was still up there in upstate?
They had moved from upstate to Pennsylvania, and I wanted to tell him that something was wrong with me. I had lost myself, and I would call there, collect, but he was always drunk, and my mother was drunk, so I couldn't call them. There was nothing there. I would say, "Hi, Mom, this is Kevin," and I could tell immediately she was intoxicated. And I said, "Well, can I speak to Pat?" So I was really in a dark period, and when I did go to school, I was misbehaving and so on, and I'd get detention a lot, and they would put me in the library and just say, "Stay here until school's over." But I sat next to a row of books that were psychology books, and I didn't deliberately choose them. They just happened to be where they sat me. And I started reading a book called A Primer of Freudian Psychology. So I became introduced to the id, the ego, the superego.
And you're how old at this point?
15.
15. Some heavy reading.
Right, and I looked at it really with a hunger for trying to figure out what was going on with me.
Yeah.
Maybe psychology books, I could figure things out. And some of the books were abnormal psychology books, and I'd read them and I felt like I had everything, paranoid schizophrenia or manic depression or whatever. In any case, I sensed that there was value in psychology. And I approached Mr. Healy one night and asked him if I could go see a psychologist. And he said, "Well, you're not that messed up." And I explained to him how messed up I was. I spent some time doing that. So he convinced the social worker to allow me to see a psychologist.
And this is Ray
D'Amato.
Yep. Okay.
So that was a turning point in my life. I went to the psychologist and I told him everything I could. I was an open book, just looking for help just so I could feel normal again. And I used to ride my bike there. It was about 5 miles away. I'd go every week, and it started to have a beneficial effect on me. I stopped vandalizing. I stopped using drugs all the time. I continued for something. And I started to do well in school again.
So you hear about this program. It's called the Equal Opportunity Program.
Right.
And does Dr. Ray introduce you to that?
No. So miraculously, I was able to graduate high school, and I attribute that largely to Dr. D'Amato, Ray. And when I graduated, I had a job as a dishwasher in a Chinese restaurant, and that's how I viewed my life would be. I'd be a dishwasher, or whatever comes after dishwasher in life. And my social worker showed up one day at the Healy home, and Mrs. Healy asked me to sit at the table with them, and he had a bunch of papers, and he explained to me that because I was a ward of New York State, I was 17 years old, and that if I wanted to, they would pay for this program that would allow me to take all the courses I screwed up in high school: biology, chemistry, math, etc. And I asked him, why would I do that? I already graduated high school. He said, well, if you did that, you could go to a 2-year college after that. So I said, okay, I'll try it. And 2 weeks later, I was in college. I was in a dormitory and taking courses, the high school courses, basically. And I just told everybody my major was liberal arts.
So you're in the dorms in this equal opportunity program,
right?
And you're taking classes. Now, at this time, where's Dennis? Where's Mickey? Where's the rest of your siblings?
They were all over the place. So they weren't as fortunate as me to have had a couple of breaks in terms of graduating high school or having a social worker present this opportunity or having a psychologist. So they were experiencing a lot of emotional difficulties, and I sort of was losing track of them.
But you say they weren't as fortunate to have the breaks, but if it, you by looking at these books, by the sheer fact that they sat you down and the books were what they were, and you pick them up because you want to understand what's going wrong with me, and then you have the foresight to sit down with Mr. Healy and say, hey, I messed up. And he says, no, you're not that messed up. And you say, hey, I really am. Let me tell you. I'm not, you had a lot of foresight there. I mean, you created a break. I mean, by taking that first step, I guess, and saying to yourself internally, I've got to expose this. I've got to talk to somebody about this. I'm reading these books, and I may or may not understand everything I'm reading here, but I'm noticing that, some of the things you're talking about in this book is a little bit how I'm feeling and how I'm thinking about myself. You created your own, by taking that first step, you created that break.
Yeah, well, thank you. I still believe that my brothers and my sister had it much worse than me. So there are 96 chapters in this book. There are 4 that are missing, and I may write them one day, and they get into those other things.
Mm-hmm. So the Equal Opportunity Program, you're taking classes, and even when you're in college, you're still feeling a little bit of anxiety, or you're getting in some tussles here and there with some other kids. Mm-hmm. What happens? Do you take a step back from that and say, you know what? Number one, I've graduated with a high school degree. Number 2, I'm taking classes in a program that's helping me. I shouldn't be doing these things, fighting. And how did you control the anxiety and manage your anger issue there?
Well, my first day at college, the building had a smell to it and a feel to it which was very much like the shelter, and I think it did something to me. It brought back memories, stimulated things, and I started feeling anxiety my first day at college. And by the time the evening came, I had my first anxiety attack. I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe somebody gave me a drug, and like LSD or something, and I freaked out and ran to the infirmary and tried to have someone calm me down. I didn't know what was going on. And a woman came in at the request of the nurse, and she appeared to me to be like a hippie. She had bell bottoms on and beads and long hair and colorful clothing. Her name was Lorraine, and she happened to be my dormitory counselor. And she spent the night talking to me. And over the next few weeks, she talked to me, tried to help me with the anxiety I was having. The other thing about being in the shelter was I had a lot of fights that I had to get into to just not have people pick on me. And when I went to college, that kicked in again. I got into a lot of fights my first semester in college, crashing through windows, punching people. It was just, I could have easily been kicked out. But between Lorraine and hitchhiking back to Brentwood to see Dr. D'Amato, I was able to sort of control that. But it also gave me my first real sense of how alcoholism can start, in that I started drinking beer and stuff around noon so I wouldn't have an anxiety attack. And I was drinking and drinking and getting really drunk.
Self-medicating. And...
Right. And I saw, okay, this is my portal to alcoholism. This is how it can be done. I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like opening a window and seeing, this is how it can be. This is how you fall in here. And it scared me, and I just begged for help from from Lorraine and Dr. D'Amato, and I even saw a counselor in the college. So I was able to nip that, I believe, right there. And once again, look towards therapy as the means for dealing with anxiety rather than alcohol.
So you get through that period, you get your first degree, which is your associate degree, and your father comes to see you receive that degree. What was that like? Did you reflect on all the negative things that had happened and the position that maybe you could have been feeling that he contributed to putting you in, but yet you managed to get this far, get this associate degree, and he shows up? What does he say to you?
Well, he seemed to be genuinely proud and happy that I had got a college degree. I was very surprised that he showed up. And he took...
Was he drinking at that time?
Yeah, he was drinking. He was always drinking. He never stopped drinking. But he wasn't drunk. Okay, and he offered to take my girlfriend and I out to the diner across the street, and we had dinner and beer or two, and then he got in a cab and drove off back, to the train station, back to New York.
And you have your associates, but you decide you want to continue your education. You've turned this corner where you see, this is really important. High school associate degree, and you decide to go on and work on a biology degree at the State University of New York. Tell me about that.
Well, college became a home for me because the Healy family moved to Delaware. I really had no place to go. College was home. So I just wanted to stay in college. I loved college. I loved the social life. I loved education. I didn't really think I would continue in getting degrees, but
it was safe.
Yeah, I was like, well, I'm only 2 years away. I just did 2 years to get an associate's degree. Maybe I can get a bachelor's degree. And that seemed just like an incredible achievement, but that's what I tried, and I did.
And during that time, you find out your sister is hospitalized.
Mm-hmm.
And as you think back, was there part of you that said, maybe I better run to her side? Early on, she was kind of took on some parenting responsibilities. and helped you, do you contemplate going back to see her and help her?
Well, my sister Donna was hospitalized for some mental illness matters, and but she wasn't the one who was the motherly figure. That was Katie.
Okay.
So Katie was older than me. She had a boyfriend. She lived in upstate New York. She had a job. She was doing reasonably well. After I got my bachelor's degree, I applied for graduate school, but I wasn't getting accepted anywhere. And one of the schools I applied to was Rutgers, and I didn't hear anything from them. So I went to my father to see if he can find a construction worker job for me. Maybe I could work in New York. So I did that for the summer. And then one night I came home to his apartment, and I was alone. But an hour later, my father came up the stairs drunk, and he tried to punch me in the face, basically. He tried to hurt me for no real reason. He was just blathering on and about things which I get into the book. But he missed my face and hurt his hand. He hit the wall behind me. And I realized, I got to get out of here. You know? So I left that moment and just hitchhiked out to Long Island and lived with a friend, my best friend in college. And towards the end of that summer, Mickey called me from New York and told me, hey, you got a letter of acceptance.
From Rutgers.
So, that was like a shock. And it was so much a shock. As soon as I got the letter, I just went to the bathroom and decided I'm going to Rutgers right now, like in the next 5 minutes. But my friend Billy said,
"Ready or not, here we come."
Yeah, he said, "I'll drive you out there." So we drove out, and I started in a graduate program in biomedical engineering at Rutgers University that fall.
Wow. And so you're in the program, and is this where you meet Patty?
I had met her a little earlier in college, but she and I eventually moved in together at Rutgers. And
now, was she also in the biomedical engineering program?
No, she was living in Syracuse, but we decided to try to live together in New Jersey.
So you say in the book you receive your PhD, and this time at graduation, your mom and the Healys show up,
right,
to watch you receive your PhD from Rutgers.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that reunion. Mom's still drinking?
No, she had actually stopped by that time. And so I have a chapter in the book where when I realized my mother stopped drinking, I just one day went out to Pennsylvania to visit her, and I noticed she wasn't drinking. And it was a great moment.
Her husband's still around at this time?
Yes, he was. And he was
sober?
Drinking. No. So at my graduation, my mother was sober, and the Healys were there as well. And, I just couldn't believe I graduated.
Conversations between your mom and the Healys?
There were. They were all just amazed. Basically, everyone was in shock. Like, oh my God, how did this happen? That was the general tone of the conversation.
Huh. So you and Patty decide to get married.
Right.
And
we had already been married at that point. I got married after I got my master's degree.
Between your master's and your PhD.
Right.
You're married. You're going through your PhD program. And today you have a very successful career.
Yes.
Biomedical engineer. And you have 3 children of your own. how was it sharing your upbringing with your children? I mean, it's I can think back, and obviously there comes a point in time, and where I asked my dad and my mom, tell me about your childhood. How are those conversations? How do you begin to where do you start by sitting your children down and saying, I want to share with you what I've gone through in my life?
Right. Well, it's a great question. My son, Kevin, is 30, so he has read the book and was affected by it. And we've had some conversations about it, but bottom line is he says he's very proud of me. Didn't know these things. I had never told him about it. He had heard little things here and there. My daughters are 20 and 18 years old, and I asked them not to read the book until I felt like it was okay for them to read it. But I struggle with that position, and they were more than happy not to read a book,
I'm not sure I would have, if I were your son, I don't know if I could have honored that. I got to tell you,
Yeah.
Dad comes and says, I wrote this book, but don't
read
want
it.
you to read it.
But I've changed and asked them to read it, so that they've just recently started reading it. I've given them the book. I know my oldest daughter, Morgan, has gotten into it. They have no idea.
Does she call you nightly? I mean, is your phone blowing up with text messaging saying, Dad?
No. They're afraid to read it because I posted on Facebook once, hey, I wrote a book, here it is. And I immediately got a lot of messages from people that were, I've started reading this and I'm afraid to read any further. This is a scary book. And so I think that got in their head a little, and they're afraid to open the book.
Well, let me ask you, are these people that are saying this, are these people that know you?
Some of them do, yeah. Most of them do.
Because I mean, quite frankly, you and I have a working business relationship, and I met you through that channel, and if I hadn't found out about the book through another colleague that you work with, I would have never known. But knowing, having sat in business meetings with you and listened to your business philosophy and your product development ideas and things of that nature, it was almost like I couldn't put the book down. I mean, I'm sitting here saying, wow, okay, here's this guy that I'm in these meetings with, and he's talking about, how we're, going to change people's lives through medical innovation. And then I pick up the book and I can't put it down. So I had just the opposite effect.
Thank you for saying that. My son read it from beginning. He never put the book down. And in fact, many of the people who've read the book have told me that. They picked it up thinking they were going to start reading a book, and then they didn't put it down. Some people have said they've read it twice, and one person even said they read it 3 times. It's just, I guess my daughters have such a lack of knowledge about my childhood and how I got to be where I am today, that they don't understand what's really in the book. So they may think it's about technology or something. I don't want to tell them what it's about. I want them to drift into it and then come to me.
I have to ask you this question. Do you drink today?
I do drink. I drink a glass of wine with dinner. There are some nuances to it. I don't ever want to feel like I'm intoxicated. I do like trying to drink wine with dinner. And I haven't experienced being intoxicated in 30 years, I would say. I just don't like the feeling. And So I have a lot of respect for alcohol, and
But how do
I
you
treat it like that.
how do you have the typical father-son, father-daughter conversation? I mean, I remember, as a kid, my dad trying to, as best he could, explain that you're going to be tempted with drugs and alcohol, and these are the things you need to be aware of, and there's going to be people that come into your life that aren't going to be good for you, and you need to be cautious about that. I mean, I would imagine that having those, and to him, my father is 83 now, so you go back in time, no cell phones, no internet, things, we were sheltered to a large degree. Even those simple conversations, you not much, the cat never got out of the bag too far.
That's right. And I have those conversations probably a few times a week because my daughters are in their late teens, 20.
Right.
And I do my best and hope for the best.
I would imagine Patty contributes to those types of conversations pretty heavily.
Yes.
Whether they might be a little difficult for you, she can bridge that gap a little bit.
Yes, we're very open with our kids about everything. Well,
some things.
Almost everything.
Almost everything.
I have a unique relationship with my daughters. Yeah, you're right. Something. But I put it all in the book. They're welcome to read it. I don't want to force it down their throats, so to speak.
If today Kevin is driving along and happens to pull into a shelter, and you see what looks to be the little Kevin Weadock showing up at the shelter for the first time, what does Kevin today say to that young man as he's just entering the shelter for the first time?
Well, it depends. It's very hard to reach a child who's in that mode. They're in crisis mode. Though, I'll just speak for myself. They're just trying to survive. But let's say theoretically there was a portal that we could talk, a theoretical portal, and I could give advice and they'd be open to it and understand it. I would tell them, this is not your fault. You're young and you can control your own life. Do as much of that as you can. I would stress the importance of education, to stay away from toxic people. If you feel like people are rough or they're doing things that are wrong, stay away from them. I would introduce the concept of therapy and psychotherapy and explain that it's extremely valuable and you're going to need it. Believe in yourself, work hard, and if you find anyone in your life that's loving or kind, gravitate towards them. Follow that and run from toxic people. And you may have to go it alone. You may have to break relationships off for a period of time with people that you love to get through this.
At the very beginning of our chat, you had mentioned that there is clinical evidence that maybe alcoholism can be passed down from generation to generation. Is that, looking back, and knowing what you know now, do you believe that?
I do believe that. I think it's, again, the genetics sort of loads the gun, your life and your environment, pull the trigger. So we have control over the latter, not pulling that trigger. I may be loaded up to be an alcoholic or someone else may be genetically, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's destiny.
The book is called The River. How did you come up with the name?
Well, the river is based on a dream in chapter 81. This wasn't a recurring dream. It was just one dream I had, but it was so profound that I remember the whole dream, even to this day. And the dream has played over in my mind many times in my life. And I had it in college, and it was about entering a brownstone building in New York, an old beaten up brownstone, and walking up the stairs, getting to the top of the stairs and opening a door. And in the door there was a movie theater, and I walked down the stairs into the movie theater towards the screen, and the only light coming in aside from the screen were these colored glass, stained glass. The light was coming in. It was that dark. But I started paying attention to the screen, and it was a river going by from my right to my left. It reminded me of the Ganges River, just with tons of people there in the water. But this was a river like after a hurricane type of river, after a storm. It was turbulent and moving quickly. And I walked right up to the edge of the screen. I was still in the theater. I put my elbows on the sort of platform up there, the stage. And the river became real. That is, I could smell the river. I could feel the water in the air. I could see birds dropping around, and all the people in the river were suffering. They were either dead or dismembered or rotting, and they were flowing by me. And I started recognizing some of them, people that I'd seen or known in my life as having real difficulty. One person was a man who fell off his wheelchair in Hell's Kitchen in New York, and I remember seeing him. His pants were halfway down, but he only had one leg. He was an African-American guy, probably in his 40s, and he was just peeing there, almost unconscious. And I remember saying, how could you get any lower than that? How does this guy ever get out of this? Then I saw a head of a high school student I remembered, who had just really overdone it with LSD and went insane. And he was a redheaded kid, but his head was floating in the river, sort of spinning, just looking at the sky. And then I saw my mother come in the river, begging me to help her. She was reaching towards me, and I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the stage. And she said, Kevin, just do what you have to do in life. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. And she slipped from my hands and went with all the other people who were dying in the river. So I was panicked and ran out of the theater up the stairs. And as soon as I got back into the brownstone building, there was a closet that was open, and I opened the closet, and there was an African-American woman there who I knew from the shelter when I was a kid, and she tried to comfort me. And she told me, don't worry, your mother's going to be okay. So that's where the river comes from. It's sort of a metaphor for people who are suffering with addiction, or mental illness, or just bad luck, and this river taking them. And whether I wanted to get in that river with my mother or try to pull her out, and the separation, how do you deal with that as a person where your loved ones are involved and you're struggling with it? And that's what it's about.
You mentioned your son's 30.
Right.
Why do you end the book with your son's birth?
That was, I started the book with my father walking down the street. I said, my father works in skyscrapers. Then we get into the whole story. And then near the end, I wanted to say, you know, I can't transfer this dysfunction and craziness to my child. And when Kevin looked at me as a newborn, for that 2 seconds, he sort of locked in on me, and I inferred and that he was looking at me and saying, "Dad, this is a new life for you and me."
Very good. Amazing book, The River, Kevin Weadock. Kevin, thank you for joining us at this table.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's an honor, and appreciate the opportunity.